Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really crucial topic in international relations, something that keeps coming up, the ongoing, pretty tense situation between the U.S. and Iran.
Absolutely. It's key for understanding West Asian geopolitics
Yeah.
and definitely relevant for anyone preparing for the UPSC exams. As you know, this relationship shapes so much.
Exactly. So our aim here is to give you a solid handle on the dynamics. We're using a recent analysis from the Eurasian Times to sort of, well, unpack things.
Yeah, the goal is to go beyond just the headlines, look at the history, the recent stuff, and really understand why we're stuck in this deadlock. Think of it as a focus briefing, basically.
Okay, so let's dive straight into where things stand right now. The Eurasian Times piece, it highlights this continuing stalemate. Any chance of a nuclear deal seems, well, pretty far off.
It does. And there was that Axios report, right?
Hmm?
Mentioning the Iranian Foreign Minister Arachi proposing some kind of interim deal to the White House envoy.
Yeah, Steve Witkoff.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, that suggests just how tough a final agreement is, doesn't it, if they're floating interim ideas?
It really does. And then you have the U.S. stance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio being quite clear.
Yeah.
No war, but also absolutely no nuclear weapons for Iran.
Right. He did say a civilian program is okay, but only if they stop enriching uranium.
Correct. But, even with that sort of caveat about a civilian program, Iran remains really wary, deeply suspicious.
You can almost see that wariness physically, can't you? The source mentions satellite images.
From the Institute for Science and International Security, showing increased security at their main nuclear complex.
Yeah, a big security perimeter, especially around those underground tunnel networks. What does that kind of activity usually signal?
Well, heightened security like that, it almost always points to a perceived increase in threat, a feeling of vulnerability.
And the article links that back to Trump, right?
Oh, yeah.
Past warnings.
Exactly. Reminds us of Trump's previous rhetoric about potential bombings if a deal wasn't reached. That kind of talk, even from a past administration, it lingers. It definitely fuels that perception of threat in Tehran now.
It really underscores how history hangs over everything in this relationship. So, okay, we have this current situation. Stalled talks, high tension, lots of suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
But to really get why it's like this, we need to look back, don't we? As the Eurasian Times piece stresses this animosity, it goes back decades.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, especially UPSC aspirants, the pivotal moment, the absolute turning point, is the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
Right. The overthrow of the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was, of course, strongly backed by the U.S.
And that didn't just topple the Shah. It brought in the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yeah.
And that whole movement was deeply intertwined with mistrust of America.
And the reasons for that mistrust, they're pretty specific, aren't they? The revolutionaries felt the U.S. propped up the Shah's regime,
An authoritarian regime, yeah.
which they blamed for, like social inequality, corruption, and just constant U.S. interference in Iranian affairs.
Those grievances were deep-seated. It's interesting, the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, it had already become a flashpoint before the hostage crisis. Protests were happening there back in '78.
Really shows the building resentment. So the timeline in '79 is key. January, the Shah leaves. February, Khomeini returns. The Islamic Republic is established. But the spark, the immediate trigger for the embassy takeover, that was October '79, when the Shah was allowed into the U.S. for cancer treatment.
That was the moment. And the article quotes the U.S. office of this historian saying how after the revolution against the pro-American Shah, the U.S. became an object of virulent criticism.
Makes sense.
And the embassy, being the most obvious symbol of that U.S. presence and past support, it just became a visible target.
Which leads us straight to November 4th, 1979, the storming of the embassy. The source says around 3,000 people, some armed.
Yeah, a chaotic scene. They took 66 Americans initially.
Though some were released later, leaving 52 held for, 444 days. An incredibly long time.
A brutal ordeal. And right after the takeover, Iran did something significant, unilaterally ended its defense treaties with both the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
A clear break, signaling a new path.
Definitely. And those early U.S. attempts to negotiate, they went nowhere. That delegation led by Ramsey Clark wasn't even allowed into the country.
Shows how high the walls were already. And Iran's main condition then was extradite the Shah.
Which President Carter refused to do, flat out.
So the U.S. tried other pressure tactics, freezing assets.
Billions in Iranian assets, yeah. Took the case to the International Court of Justice, imposed an embargo.
But none of that worked to free the hostages quickly.
No. Which led the U.S. military down a different path. Planning rescue. Operation Eagle Claw.
Ah, yes, the rescue attempt in April 1980. Incredibly complex, involving, what, all branches of the military?
It was a massive undertaking. The idea was this secret rendezvous, codenamed Desert One, deep in the Iranian desert.
Using MC-130 transports, helicopters flying in from the USS Nimitz.
RH-53Ds, yeah. The plan was to refuel there, then move an assault team towards Tehran, hit the embassy, grab the hostages, and airlift them out. Highly ambitious.
Extremely. Relying on so many things going perfectly right in enemy territory.
And, well, they didn't go right. Almost immediately, problems cropped up. A huge sandstorm, a haboob, kicked up.
Reduced visibility, damaged equipment.
Exactly. And critically, several helicopters had mechanical failures. Hydraulic problems were a big one. They ended up with fewer operational choppers than they calculated they needed for the mission.
So they had to call it off.
Carter made the call. Abort mission. But the problems weren't over.
Right, the tragedy at Desert One itself.
Yeah, during the withdrawal, in the confusion and darkness, one of the remaining helicopters collided with an EC-130 tanker plane on the ground.
A massive explosion. 8 U.S. servicemen were killed.
A terrible end to the mission. They had to abandon equipment, withdraw immediately. The U.S. announced the failure the next day. Just devastating.
And that failure must have just deepened the animosity and mistrust on both sides.
Immensely. Then, a few months later, the Shah died in Egypt.
Did that change Iran's demands?
It shifted the focus, less about getting the Shah back, more about getting his assets, those frozen funds, returned.
And eventually, the hostages were released January 20th, 1981.
The very day Ronald Reagan took office, so the 444-day crisis ended. But as the Eurasian Times piece rightly points out, the damage to U.S.-Iran relations, it was profound, irreparable, really. Cast a very long shadow.
So wrapping this up, it's just crystal clear, isn't it? The deadlock today isn't new. It's so deeply rooted in that history, the '79 revolution, the hostage crisis.
That legacy of intense mistrust, it just permeates everything, especially the current arguments over Iran's nuclear program and how the U.S. responds.
And for anyone studying for the UPSC, understanding this whole historical arc, how it shapes today, is just essential for analyzing anything happening in West Asia.
Which really brings us to a big question, maybe something for you, our listeners, to think about. Given this incredibly deep-seated history, all this suspicion, all these major events, what pathways, if any, realistically exist for de-escalation?
Yeah, like, is there a way towards a more sustainable, less confrontational situation, considering what both sides want and the wider region?
That's a tough one, a really tough one.
Well, we really hope this deep dive has helped clarify some of the complexities here. If you found it useful, maybe for your exam prep or just understanding the news, please do like and subscribe to the deep dive.
And definitely leave a comment. If you have more questions or your own thoughts on the U.S.-Iran dynamic, we'd love to hear them.
Your input really helps us shape what we cover next.
And just a reminder, our main source for digging into this today was that analysis from the Eurasian Times.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.